So, if you live in a pretty nature-rich area, there's lots of forests around you, there's probably some edible food right nearby, which is free food as well, which is a very attractive concept. But there are quite a few things you should be aware of first. First being, I'm not recommending you go out and eat things in the wild without doing your research first. I am free of liability in case you eat something that's not safe to eat, because there are quite a lot of things that are not safe to eat out in the wild, and it is important to be aware of that. Especially plants that look like edible plants and then are not edible plants. So that's my first tip, is that don't blame me, first of all. Second, be extremely familiar with what you're doing. So a lot of people, they get their book. I have even some books of my own where it's like, here's a picture of the edible plant, here's the picture of the poisonous plant that will stop your heart in 3 seconds. And they look identical. So those pictures are not enough to help you forage for food, whether it be mushrooms or plants or roots or anything, berries. So those books are helpful as a guide to help you keep up your memory, but I highly recommend you go with someone who actually knows what they're doing, an expert. Consult with an expert first. Maybe even, sometimes there's tours, they bring you out into the forest and help you find some edible food. So that's what I recommend. Go out with an expert first, see what they're doing. They'll teach you, besides the appearance of the plant, they might tell you about the smell, how it changes over the seasons, or the roots, the stalks, certain colors. So they'll tell you the whole thing, everything you need to know. And that will give you a much better foundation than just reading a book about it. And then, of course, in addition, once you go out with the expert, you could use the book as an additional helper. But expert first. Then, once you have kind of a foundation of what you could forage for and not die, the next thing is, don't take it all. Don't go into the forest and just tear everything out and take it for yourself. It's not proper etiquette. Proper etiquette is taking only what you need. So say you want to go foraging for mushrooms for your mushroom stew. Go out into the forest, take however many mushrooms you think you might need, maybe a little bushel, and leave the rest. You don't need the rest of the mushrooms. Leave them for someone else or the animals or something, and just take what you need. Because again, that's proper etiquette, and it's also better for the environment, so you don't just I'm taking this. I'm taking it away from you now. Again, no matter if it's mushrooms or berries or anything else, just take what you need. Then, you should also be pretty careful about where you're foraging. So, obviously, if you're on someone's property, that's a no-go. But besides that, you should also be careful about the type of land that you're on. Because, you don't know the history of that land. Maybe there was a terrible, terrible chemical spill there a few decades ago that really messed up the plant life there. Maybe it's overloaded with lead or something, There have been cases of this happening. It's really not common, but it can happen, especially if you know that you're in an area that used to be more industrial, or there's an industrial area nearby. Where I used to be from, near Cleveland, Ohio, arguably one of the most industrial and polluted areas ever. Cuyahoga National Park, which is a beautiful park with waterfalls and things like that, used to be an industrial wasteland, and they really only solved that problem in the 70s. But again, you don't know the history of especially not even parks, just forest. So be a little bit careful. If you see there's a lot of garbage or strange things lying around, maybe it's best to go somewhere else to find your foraging foods. Another tip, which is kind of more obvious, don't forage for plants that are unhealthy looking. Because obviously, if you see a plant that's covered in warts, just falling apart, brown and wilted, it's not going to be that great to eat. It might be diseased, it might have a strange fungus, it might have a parasite. That's not really what you want to be eating. usually it's very, very difficult to get sick from a diseased plant, but, you know, maybe there's bugs on it. I don't want to be eating bugs when I'm out foraging for my food. So stick with the healthier looking plants. Also, if the plants are sick, it's also a good indicator of my previous point of maybe that land isn't very healthy. Maybe there's something not quite right about it. Then, coming to my next point, try not to forage alone. So, I'm a proponent for doing a lot of things alone. I think being alone is great. Especially out in the wilderness, you could just enjoy yourself. But foraging alone can be a little bit dangerous, especially if you're in completely uncharted territory. There's no trails, there's no roads, there's no phone service. You know, you don't want to fall over a log and hit your head on a rock and you're passed out for 3 days and you don't know what happened. So, going with a foraging buddy is always a good idea because, obviously, they have your back. They're there to help just be your companion and maybe help you forage for some things. And hopefully your buddy has more foraging experience than you, so again, you can avoid those deadly plants. And my final tip is kind of important. Now, I'm not allergic to anything, so I'm pretty lucky, but a lot of people are allergic to a lot of things. And if you've never tried certain mushrooms or certain things out in the wilderness, you don't know if you're allergic to them. And a good way to test that is by taking a very small bite of these things that you haven't tried before. And then, of course, if you're allergic, something bad will happen. And if you're not allergic, nothing will happen. So that's a good way to list out certain plants that you might be allergic to. And then, of course, once you get that out of the way, you won't have to do that anymore. You can just eat them as usual. So those are my main tips for foraging for food out in the wilderness. So if you found these tips helpful, of course, you can leave a like and maybe subscribe. And I make videos throughout the week, so you could stick around for those.